I was 29 when I realized love in my family had always been conditional. For years, I believed every sacrifice bought me belonging. Covering my dad's heart surgery, my mom's mortgage, my brother's tuition and car payments, even living alone in a cramped apartment so they could keep their house. I thought loyalty was measured in dollars, not hugs. But on Christmas night, after I paid for every glass of wine, every plate of steak, and even placed a $400 to $500 watch on my father's wrist, he leaned back in his chair, looked straight into my eyes, and said the words that broke me in ways money never could. "You're not even part of this family. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. My name is Rachel Miller, and for the last few years I've been building a solid career as a senior financial analyst at a downtown Chicago investment firm. People at work assume I must live comfortably, maybe in a sleek high-rise apartment with city views, but the truth is much different. My home is a one-bedroom unit on the north side with peeling paint on the windowsills and second-hand furniture I picked up off Craigslist. The dining table barely fits 2 chairs, and the couch still bears the imprint of the stranger who sold it to me for $50. On the walls hang a few discount store frames with prints I thought might brighten the place, but really they just remind me how temporary everything feels. It's not that I couldn't afford better. My salary is decent, especially for someone my age, and I work long hours, often 60 a week. But when half of every paycheck disappears into bills that aren't even mine, upgrades are a luxury I don't allow myself. For 5 years, I've been quietly funneling money into my family's needs, covering the mortgage on their suburban house in Evanston, when payments fell behind, paying for my father's cardiac procedures and medications, helping Thomas, my older brother, make his car payments, when he was close to repossession, and writing tuition checks for my younger brother Caleb every time he switched majors and dropped another semester. I used to feel proud when I hit transfer on my banking app, proud that I was the reliable one, the fixer, the daughter who stepped up when things were falling apart, but pride has a way of curdling into something else. I'd come home after a 14-hour day, drop my heels by the door, and stare at the empty apartment. No one was there to say thank you. No one even seemed to notice. They just kept asking. I remember once 2 winters ago I skipped heating my apartment for 3 days to make sure my parents' utility bill was paid on time. I sat at my desk in a wool coat and fingerless gloves, trying to build financial models with shivering hands. My coworkers joked about the cold snap, about how they cranked up their thermostats and drank hot cocoa in their condos, while I nodded and smiled and thought about the space heater I couldn't plug in because every dollar was already spoken for. There's a strange emptiness in giving everything and still feeling like it isn't enough. That emptiness weighed heavier each year, pressing into me like Chicago's February wind, cutting through the thickest coat. I was in the middle of microwaving leftover pasta when my phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID flashed Mom. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Lately, every call from her meant another problem, another bill, another crisis. But guilt is louder than self-preservation. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered, "Hi, Mom." Her voice was brisk, but there was an edge of excitement. "Rachel, I've been thinking about Christmas this year. Your father, he deserves something special. After the surgery, after everything he's been through, he wants the family together. A real celebration." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, bracing myself. "That sounds nice. What did you have in mind?" "Well," she said, drawing the word out, "I thought we could do something at Oakwood Prime. Your dad always liked that steakhouse downtown. You know how expensive it is, but it would mean the world to him." She paused just long enough to make sure I understood. "Do you think you can handle it?" "Handle it. Not help. Not contribute. Handle it." I glanced around my tiny apartment at the chipped coffee mug holding my reheated dinner at the sagging couch that had supported a dozen strangers before me. My paycheck was already stretched thin, my savings account nearly drained, but the word no lodged in my throat the way it always did. Sure, I heard myself say, "I'll take care of it." Her sigh of relief came through the line. "I knew I could count on you. I'll tell your father it's all set. He'll be so happy. She didn't ask how I was, whether I had plans, whether I could actually afford it. She didn't need to. She assumed, as always, that I would find a way. When I hung up, I set the phone down and stood still in the quiet kitchen. Outside, snow flurries brushed against the window, scattering in the yellow glow of the streetlight. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from cold, but from the sudden weight in my chest. A Christmas dinner at Oakwood Prime. 8 people, maybe more. Wine entrees, desserts, flowers decorations. A bill that would easily climb into 4 figures all on my card. I thought of my father in his blazer raising a glass, smiling at my brothers. I thought of the way he always looked past me at the table as if I were a guest in my own family. The pasta sat forgotten on the counter. I pulled the curtain shut, blocking out the swirl of snow, and whispered into the empty room, I don't know how much more of this I can do. Still, habit is stronger than doubt. I picked up my phone again, opened the Oakwood Prime website, and began making a reservation. I had no idea that saying yes to that one dinner would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. I had no idea that a single night would split my world apart. I just knew my father wanted a Christmas he'd never forget, and he was about to get it. When I think back to the early 2000s, the images come like snapshots burned into my memory. Saturday mornings in our backyard in Evanston, my dad standing tall in his Bears cap, clapping and shouting encouragement while Thomas ran football drills with his friends. Dad's voice boomed with pride, telling the neighbors, "That boy's going places." I stood off to the side, clutching the book I'd brought outside, pretending I didn't care that no one asked me to join. Caleb, barely 6 at the time, was chasing a ball around, and every clumsy kick he made drew laughter and praise. I remember the sting of it most when I tried to share my own achievements. The day I got my acceptance letter from Northwestern, I ran into the kitchen, letter in hand, breathless with excitement. Mom was stirring a pot of chili, humming to herself. Dad sat at the table reading the Tribune coffee mug steaming in front of him. I blurted out, "I got in full scholarship." My voice cracked with joy. Dad looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "That's good, Rachel. But you know, Thomas just made varsity. That's real pride right there." Then he turned back to his paper. The paper in my hand shook, but I forced a smile, mumbling something about going to call a friend. Upstairs, I pressed the acceptance letter to my chest, telling myself it didn't matter, that maybe someday he would see me the way he saw my brothers. Evenings in our kitchen felt the same. Mom worked hard, always planning meals, always making sure there was enough food on the table. Dad would sit with a beer, laughing about Thomas's latest touchdown or Caleb's antics at school. My job was to clear plates, scrub dishes, and stay quiet. I'd listen to their laughter through the hum of running water, my hands pruned from soap, and wonder if anyone even noticed I was there. The imbalance was clearest in the small, everyday choices. Dad would drive Thomas across town for football practice, wait in the car, and then take him for burgers afterward. He'd take Caleb fishing at Lake Michigan, teaching him how to bait a hook and telling stories about his own childhood. With me, he gave a pat on the shoulder before exams and said, "Good luck, kiddo," as if academics were some private hobby I'd chosen for myself, not something worth celebrating. I still remember standing on stage at the high school auditorium, the spotlight glaring in my eyes as they called my name for top honors. I scanned the audience, searching for my dad's face. He was there, all right. Sitting back with his arms folded, polite applause on his hands, but nothing like the roaring pride he showed for Thomas's games. Afterward, when I tried to share how hard I'd worked, he ruffled my hair and said, "That's nice, Rachel. But you know grades won't carry a family. Thomas's leadership on the field, that's what matters." The words cut deeper than he could have known. I laughed it off in the moment, but later that night I cried into my pillow, clutching the medal they'd hung around my neck. Mom tried in her way to balance things. She'd tell me she was proud that I was the smart one. But it always came with a sigh, like my intelligence was a consolation prize, not something to be admired. And when Dad was around, she rarely contradicted him. One evening, as I scrubbed at a stubborn pan, I overheard Dad say, "You know, Diane, girls grow up, get married, and start their own families. "It's the boys who carry the name who take care of us when we're old," Mom murmured in agreement, or maybe she was just too tired to argue. Either way, the sentence landed on me like a stone. I wanted to scream that I was right there, that I wasn't going anywhere, that I could take care of them too. But instead, I rinsed the pan, stacked it on the drying rack, and kept my mouth shut. The words echoed in my head long after weaving themselves into the fabric of who I believed I was, someone who could give everything and still never be enough. Those years built the foundation of the person I became, driven, relentless, desperate for approval that never came. I thought if I worked harder, if I achieved more, maybe the balance would tip. Maybe one day Dad would look at me the way he looked at Thomas. But the truth was, no matter how much I did, the echoes of his voice stayed with me. A daughter will marry and leave, a son is the one who matters. And that belief, as much as I wanted to fight it, followed me into adulthood, into every sacrifice I made, and into the silence that wrapped itself around me when I agreed to handle that Christmas dinner. At Northwestern, my days were a blur of lectures, part-time shifts, and late-night study sessions under the harsh fluorescent lights of the library. I worked at the circulation desk 3 nights a week, scanning IDs and checking out books for students who never even noticed my name tag. On weekends, I picked up shifts at a diner off Sheridan Road, serving pancakes and bottomless coffee to families heading to church or students hung over from frat parties. I'd wipe syrup off tables with aching hands, then rush back to the dorm to cram for exams. There were times I would fall asleep over my accounting textbook, head resting on highlighted pages, the hum of the radiator filling the silence. My friends talked about spring break trips and concerts while I saved every dollar. I couldn't afford to splurge, not when tuition and books already threatened to swallow me whole. The scholarship covered a lot, but not everything. By the time graduation came in 2015, I had dark circles under my eyes but a diploma in hand. Dad didn't even attend the ceremony. He claimed work at the construction company had him tied up, though the truth was his pride only extended so far. Mom sat in the audience clapping politely. When my name was called, I searched for their faces, hoping for some flash of excitement. Instead, I found Thomas cheering on FaceTime from his office, Caleb clowning around in the background. Dad never even picked up the call. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I had a job offer lined up at a Chicago investment firm, a place with sleek glass walls, and a lobby that smelled of leather and money. My first real salary felt like a miracle. At 22, I was pulling in more than my father had in his best years. I rented a tiny studio in Uptown, convinced it was only temporary until I could afford better. But almost immediately, the calls started. "Rachel, your father's truck broke down. We can't afford the repairs. Rachel, the mortgage is late again. Can you send something just this once? Rachel, your brother Caleb's tuition didn't go through. He's going to get dropped from classes." At first, I didn't hesitate. I wired $500 here, $300 there. I skipped dinners out with coworkers, telling myself I didn't need cocktails and tapas anyway. When Caleb begged for help with his books, I transferred another chunk of my paycheck, ignoring the fact that he barely showed up to class. The pattern was so gradual I almost didn't notice. By 2017, I was covering my parents' mortgage every other month. Dad's heart condition grew worse, and even with insurance, his surgeries left bills stacked on their kitchen counter. I paid those too, swiping my credit card and promising myself I'd pay it down later. Meanwhile, Thomas called with his own emergencies. "I'm behind on the car. They're threatening repossession," he confessed one night. I sighed, knowing my rent was due, but transferred $2,500 anyway. He promised to pay me back. He never did. I got used to living small. I furnished my apartment with hand-me-downs and Craigslist finds, cooked pasta and rice in rotation, and skipped vacations altogether. When colleagues posted pictures from Paris or Cabo, I scrolled quickly past, ashamed of the jealousy burning in my chest. By 2020, I'd sent home more than $20,000. I knew the number because I tracked it obsessively in a spreadsheet, every line item. A reminder of what I'd sacrificed: $8,000 for Dad's surgery, $6,000 toward the mortgage, $3,500 for Caleb's false start at community college, $2,500 for Thomas's car. The list stretched on, and so did the requests. Late at night, I'd sit at the small table in my apartment, open my banking app, and stare at the dwindling balance. Friends invited me to join them for drinks or yoga retreats, but I always declined. I couldn't justify spending money on myself when the next phone call might be another emergency. Sometimes I tried to bring it up. "Mom, I can't keep doing this forever." I'd say, my voice tight. She would sigh heavily. "Sweetheart, we appreciate everything, but you know your father's pride. He doesn't like asking. We wouldn't bother you if it wasn't important." Important. It was always important. The truth was, I wasn't living a life. I was managing crises one wire transfer at a time. My 20s slipped away in a haze of overtime shifts and mounting resentment I refused to acknowledge. One winter evening in 2022, I came home after another 14-hour day. The streets outside were glazed with ice headlights bouncing off snowbanks. Inside my apartment was dim and silent. I dropped my bag, toed off my heels, and sat on the edge of my bed, still in my work clothes. I opened my phone, pulled up my banking app, and saw the numbers again. My balance shaved down to almost nothing after covering the latest round of bills. I thought of coworkers laughing about their ski trips, their new condos, their engagement parties. I thought of the life I might have had if I wasn't chained to everyone else's needs. In the silence of that cramped studio, the radiator clanking weakly in the corner, a thought rose unbidden, sharp as glass. When would it be my turn? When would I finally live for myself? I didn't have an answer. All I had was the weight of obligations pressing down on me and the dread of the next phone call I knew was coming. Chicago in December felt like it was wrapped in glass. The streets glittered with frost. Every breath turned white in the air, and the whole city seemed to hum with holiday anticipation. Storefronts on Michigan Avenue gleamed with lights and animated displays. Couples hurried by with shopping bags, and Christmas music leaked from every open door. I should have felt part of it, but instead I carried a different weight, one I'd chosen to shoulder again. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of Oakwood Prime, the kind of steakhouse where leather booths gleamed and every surface smelled faintly of polish and money. The maitre d' greeted me warmly. I'd been in 3 times already this week. He led me through the main dining room, past the fireplaces decorated with garlands and twinkling lights, into the private room I had reserved. The space was perfect, a long mahogany table set with white linen crystal glasses already lined in neat rows, and fresh evergreen centerpieces mixed with roses. Outside the frosted windows, snowflakes drifted down in the pale afternoon light. I ran my hand across the polished table and felt a strange mixture of pride and dread. "Everything looks wonderful," I told the young server who came in with a notepad. "We'll need seating for 8. And I want a bottle of the Cabernet Sauvignon. Your reserve one. My father likes it." He nodded. "That one's $90 a bottle. Should I bring it out when you're seated?" "Yes," I said quickly before I could think twice. "And put it all on one bill. I'll cover everything. I don't want my family to worry about cost." The words came easily, though my stomach clenched. It wasn't just about paying. It was about making sure no one saw the cracks in our family, at least not tonight. After the staff left, I slipped a small velvet box from my purse. Inside lay the Tag Heuer watch I'd bought 2 weeks ago. I'd seen my dad pause at a jewelry store window once, his eyes lingering on the blue face his reflection caught in the glass. He hadn't said anything, but I noticed. And noticing had cost me $4,500, nearly every bit of my savings. I turned the watch over in my hands, admiring the sleek steel, imagining the way it would look on his wrist. I wanted him to feel appreciated, respected, like the man he always tried to be. I wanted him just once to look at me with the same pride he reserved for my brothers. Slipping the box back into my bag, I took one more look around the room before leaving. The decorations were perfect, the table elegant, the wine chosen. It was exactly what my father would want, exactly what I hoped would make him see me. The cold slapped my face as I stepped outside. I pulled my scarf tighter and walked briskly toward the train station, boots crunching in the snow. Downtown Chicago glowed with Christmas lights strung across the lampposts, bells ringing from Salvation Army kettles, children pointing at window displays. Everyone else seemed to be rushing toward joy, while I carried the nervous flutter of someone waiting for approval she might never get. Back in my apartment that evening, I kicked off my boots and dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Mom, it's all set," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I booked the private room at Oakwood Prime. Flowers, wine, everything. I'll cover the cost so you and Dad don't need to worry." There was a pause, then her voice flat and brisk. "Well, you've always been good at organizing things." That was it. No, thank you, no excitement, just the same cool acknowledgement I'd come to expect. I swallowed the sting and forced a smile she couldn't see. "I just want it to be special," I said. "I'm sure it will be," she replied, already distracted. "I have to finish dinner. We'll see you then." The line clicked dead, and I stared at my phone, the silence of my apartment pressing in. My hands tightened around the receiver until I forced myself to set it down. I wandered to the small desk by the window where a neat stack of unopened mail waited. On top lay a thin envelope with my mother's handwriting. A few months back, she had asked me to sign some routine paperwork for the bank. I'd been rushing to a meeting already late, so I'd scribbled my signature without reading closely. Something about refinancing, she'd said. I'd stuffed the papers back into the envelope and tucked it away, telling myself I'd look later. Now, in the quiet glow of the street lamp outside, I remembered the weight of the pen in my hand, the way she had slid the forms across the table so casually. I shook the thought away, unwilling to add another worry to the pile already on my chest. Instead, I looked again at the reservation confirmation glowing on my laptop screen. The date, the time, the cost estimate. I traced the numbers with my eyes and whispered into the still air, "This has to be worth it. It just has to be." Snow tapped gently against the window. Somewhere in the distance, I heard carolers begin a song I used to love. I closed the laptop, pulled the blanket around my shoulders, and tried to believe that one perfect Christmas dinner could heal a lifetime of imbalance. The private dining room glowed with soft amber light, the kind that made the garland sparkle and cast warm shadows across the polished mahogany table. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, its ornaments catching every glint from the chandelier. The faint notes of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" drifted in from the main dining hall, blending with the muffled clink of silverware and the low hum of conversations outside. I had arrived 30 minutes early just to make sure everything was perfect. I adjusted the flower arrangements one last time, straightened the menus at each setting, and double-checked that the wine was waiting on standby. My heart beat fast, a mix of nerves and hope. Tonight was supposed to be about Dad. Tonight was supposed to show him that I cared enough to make it unforgettable. The door opened, and my family filed in. Dad came first, wearing his old navy blazer with a tie I'd never seen before, a confident smile lighting up his face. "Well, this is something," he said, looking around like he owned the place. Mom followed, her red dress shimmering with sequins pearls at her ears. She scanned the room, nodded once, and slid into her chair without a word. Thomas and Stephanie entered behind them, their kids Ethan and Chloe bouncing with excitement. "Wow," Ethan exclaimed, climbing onto his chair. "Look at all the forks," Chloe tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing at the napkin folded into a neat fan. Stephanie smiled, smoothing her daughter's hair, while Thomas gave me a quick grin. "You went all out, Rachel. This is really nice." Caleb came in last, his coat-wrinkled hair messy, as though he'd just rolled out of bed. "Traffic," he muttered, shrugging as he dropped into his seat. The smell of cologne barely covered the stale scent of cigarettes clinging to his jacket. For a moment, as everyone settled, it felt like the dinner might actually go well. Dad raised his glass of water. "To being together. That's what counts." We all clinked glasses, and I let myself breathe. The servers moved in smoothly, pouring wine and setting down baskets of warm bread. Conversation started easily enough. Thomas launched into a story about closing a big account at his insurance firm, complete with hand gestures and self-deprecating jokes that made Stephanie laugh politely. Ethan and Chloe whispered about presents they hoped to get their eyes wide with Christmas anticipation. I watched it all, sipping my wine, trying to hold on to the glow of normalcy. But then Dad leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass, and the shift began. "You know," he said loudly as though addressing the whole room, "it's funny how things work out. My sons here building their lives, carrying the family forward. And my daughter. He glanced at me, his smile sharp. Well, still single, still throwing money around. Strange, isn't it? The words hung in the air, casual enough to pass as a joke, but heavy enough to land like a stone. Stephanie shifted uncomfortably. Thomas chuckled awkwardly. Caleb smirked into his bread roll. I forced a laugh, my cheeks hot. It's Dad's night. Let's just enjoy it. But inside, something small cracked. The appetizers arrived, and the kids clapped at the tiny plates of shrimp cocktail. Conversation bubbled up again. Thomas talking about his boss, Mom describing the new curtains she'd ordered, but Dad's comment kept echoing in my head. When the server came to refill glasses, Dad leaned toward him and said, "Make sure you keep pouring. My daughter here has deep pockets." He chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. I smiled tightly, pretending it didn't matter, but my fingers trembled against the stem of my glass. Every time I glanced around the table, I wondered if anyone else noticed. Did they think like he did? Did they believe the only thing I brought to this family was my credit card? Ethan jabbered on about a Christmas play at school. Chloe showed me the reindeer she'd drawn on her napkin. I praised them, grateful for their innocent chatter, their complete lack of malice. For a moment their joy steadied me. Still, when Dad lifted his glass again and said, "To daughters who think money can buy happiness," I felt the laughter catch in my throat. Everyone chuckled nervously, like they didn't know if it was safe not to. I joined in because that's what I'd always done. Smile, nod, pretend. But beneath the smile, something sharp was stirring. The music outside shifted to Silent Night, the notes drifting through the walls. I stared at the flickering candles on the table, the perfect flowers I'd arranged, the velvet box tucked in my purse with the gift I'd chosen so carefully. My chest tightened. I laughed with them, yes, but inside the hurt spread quiet and certain, like cracks beneath ice. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the night was only beginning to unravel. The plates arrived steaming, the scent of butter and seared beef filling the room. Silver lids were lifted with a practiced flourish, revealing ribeyes, fillets, and roasted vegetables glistening under the lights. The kids clapped as if it were a magic trick, and for a fleeting moment the room buzzed with comfort. I cut into my steak, trying to anchor myself in the ritual of dinner, the steady scrape of knife and fork. Then my father leaned forward, his knife poised above his plate, his eyes fixed on me. "Tell me, Rachel," he said loudly so the whole table could hear, "is there anyone at that fancy office of yours who notices you? Or are you planning to spend the rest of your life alone?" My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Heat flooded my neck, but before I could form words, Thomas burst out laughing. "Good one, Dad. She's married to her spreadsheets." Caleb snorted, chiming in with a smirk. "She already has a husband. His name is Overtime." Laughter rippled around the table. Stephanie shifted in her seat, her hand brushing mine under the table as if to steady me. She quickly spoke up, her voice gentle. "So Ethan's teacher says he's been reading at a 5th grade level already. We're really proud." But Dad wasn't done. He cut her off with a wave of his hand, his gaze still locked on me. "You know what I think? A woman without a husband or children, there's nothing to be proud of there. Doesn't matter how much money she makes. At the end of the day, it's meaningless." The words hit me harder than I expected. I stared down at the steak on my plate, its juices pooling in the center, suddenly unappetizing. My eyes burned, and I blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one heavier than the last. I forced my fork into the meat, chewing without tasting. The laughter had already moved on to another story, Dad bragging about Thomas's latest work promotion, Caleb joking about his big break in music that never seemed to come. My voice had been effectively erased from the table, my presence reduced to the butt of a joke. I tried to steady myself, pulling air deep into my lungs. I pressed my palms against my thighs under the table, willing my body not to shake. In my mind, I ran through numbers calculations, anything to drown out the sting of his words. Mortgage balances, tuition payments, hospital bills. Every dollar I'd handed over that had kept this family afloat, and still to him I was nothing more than a lonely woman throwing money around. The candlelight flickered across the polished table, casting shadows over my father's face. His jaw tightened as he poured himself more wine, his laughter booming over the smaller voices around him. Stephanie tried again to steer the conversation, this time toward Chloe's dance recital. For a moment, the children's excitement filled the space, their pure joy cutting through the tension. But as I reached for my glass of water, my hand trembled. I lifted it carefully, hoping no one would see. The cool liquid slid down my throat, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest. I lowered the glass and breathed long and slow, telling myself to hold it together. My eyes blurred, and I blinked hard, willing the tears to retreat. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here, not tonight. I pressed my lips into a thin smile, nodding as though I were listening, though the words around me had faded into a dull roar. Inside, the hurt pooled heavy and deep, swelling against the dam I had built for years. And as I looked at my father across the table, glass raised in yet another toast to himself, I wondered how much longer I could sit quietly in the role he'd written for me. The servers cleared the dinner plates and replaced them with small china saucers for dessert. A hush of anticipation settled over the table when Mom clapped her hands lightly and said, "Time for presents." The kids perked up instantly, their faces bright with excitement. Thomas reached beneath the table and handed Dad a neatly wrapped box. "From all of us," he said, nodding toward Stephanie and the kids. Dad tore open the paper to reveal a crisp blue dress shirt. "For when you finally retire that old plaid thing," Thomas joked. Dad chuckled, holding the shirt against his chest, and praised Thomas for his good taste. Next was Caleb, who slid over a gift bag decorated with snowmen. Inside was a framed photo of him and Dad on a fishing trip from 2 summers ago. Dad smiled politely, muttering something about good memories, though the picture still smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. Then all eyes turned to me. My heart thudded as I reached into my purse and pulled out the velvet box. I had imagined this moment so many times. Dad's eyes lighting up, his expression softening, maybe even gratitude spilling out. My hands trembled as I pushed the box across the table. "This one's from me." Dad's brows lifted. He opened the box slowly, almost reverently, and when he saw the tag here glinting in the candlelight, his breath caught. For a split second, I saw it. The glimmer of tears, the pride, the astonishment. He traced the face of the watch with his finger, his voice low. "Rachel, this is—" But just as quickly the emotion drained away. He snapped the box shut, cleared his throat, and forced a thin smile. "It's nice," he said, leaning back in his chair. His voice grew sharper. "But do you think buying an expensive watch is how you prove you belong in this family?" The air left my lungs. Silence crashed over the table. Ethan and Chloe looked up confused, their forks frozen mid-air. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his grin faltering. Stephanie reached for her wine, avoiding my eyes. Caleb smirked into his napkin as if he'd been waiting for this. My face burned hot, though my whole body felt cold. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat locked. The velvet box sat between us like evidence of a crime, its weight suddenly unbearable. Dad set the box aside as if it were nothing, reaching for his glass of wine. He toasted casually to no one in particular, the stem catching the light. The words he'd thrown at me still echoed sharp and cutting louder than the clinking glasses around us. I lowered my gaze to my lap, forcing air through my lungs, trying to keep steady. My fork slipped against the porcelain plate, the scrape loud in the silence. No one dared break it. That was when I realized the night wasn't drifting toward celebration. It was veering straight into something else entirely. Something I had spent years trying to avoid. The watch lay unopened on the side of the table, and I felt the crack inside me widen, waiting for what I somehow knew was coming next. Dad swirled the last of his wine, his eyes narrowing as they settled on me. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and his voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "You're not part of this family. You just use money to buy yourself a seat here." The words landed so hard I felt them in my chest. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The chatter of the dining room outside faded. The twinkle of the Christmas lights blurred, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Mom sat perfectly still, her face blank, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look at me, didn't look at him, just stared at the flowers in the center of the table, as if she could will herself invisible. Thomas shifted in his chair, his head ducking eyes on his plate. Stephanie's hand hovered near his arm, but she said nothing. Caleb scrolled through his phone, pretending not to hear the glow of the screen lighting his smirk. I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap nails, pressing into my skin. Everything inside me screamed to react, to fight back, but my throat locked tight. Images flashed through my mind like a cruel slideshow, wiring money for Dad's surgery, covering the mortgage when they were about to lose the house, paying Caleb's tuition even though he dropped out, buying Thomas time with his car payments. Every dollar, every sacrifice dismissed in an instant. The silence was suffocating. My chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, and I forced my eyes up to meet his. Dad didn't flinch. He poured himself another glass, as calm as if he'd just commented on the weather. "You think a fancy dinner and a watch mean you belong here?" he added almost casually. "Family isn't about money, Rachel. It's about what matters." My voice trembled in my throat, but never made it past my lips. I wanted to shout to remind him that without me there wouldn't even be a house to gather in, that his heart might have stopped beating years ago without the bills I covered. But no one at the table moved. No one rushed to defend me. Their silence was as loud as his accusation. The garland twinkled, the soft carol drifting in from the main room carried on like nothing had shattered. Ethan poked at his dessert, confused. Chloe asked quietly if she could open another roll. Their innocence made the moment even crueler. I felt the sting behind my eyes, hot and sharp. I blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. My fork lay untouched by my plate, the steak long gone cold. My breathing quickened, shallow, uneven, the tightness in my chest pressing harder with each second. I swallowed hard, forcing air into my lungs, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. I wouldn't break here. Not in front of him, not with everyone watching. But inside me something had already cracked wide open. The years of swallowing hurt, of forcing smiles, of quietly carrying the weight. They were all pushing to the surface. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I realized the anger building was stronger than the shame. I lowered my gaze to the half-empty wineglass in front of me, my reflection warped in its curve. The room felt like it had frozen around me, but inside, I burned a fire rising that I couldn't smother any longer. I didn't move, not yet. I sat in silence, the storm inside me gathering force, knowing the next words out of my mouth would change everything. I lifted my glass slowly, the stem steady between my fingers, though my pulse thundered in my ears. A smile curved on my lips, not wide but sharp, controlled. "Perfect," I said, my voice calm, almost cheerful. "Then don't ask me for another dime." The silence cracked like glass. Forks froze, eyes snapped toward me, the weight of my words sinking in before anyone could speak. I set the glass down gently, folded my napkin, and leaned forward. "Let's make it clear, shall we? $8,000 for Dad's surgery, $6,000 to keep the house from foreclosure, $3,500 for Caleb's community college tuition. Remember that semester you never finished? $2,500 for Thomas's car, when the repo guys were circling. And tonight I gestured toward the table, the wine, the glowing candles, $1,200 for this dinner." Dad's face reddened, his jaw tight. Thomas's mouth hung open, words failing him. Caleb's smirk dissolved, his skin pale beneath the restaurant's golden light. Mom pressed her lips together, hands clenched in her lap as though holding herself shut. The kids blinked at me, confused, their innocence untouched by the numbers that hovered heavy in the air. Stephanie stared down at her plate, but her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. I exhaled, letting the silence stretch, each number settling like a stone in the center of the table. "So if I'm not family," I added softly, "I suppose all of that was just charity." The server appeared at the door, hesitant, sensing the tension. I caught his eye and beckoned him closer. "Separate checks, please," I said clearly. He blinked. "Excuse me. Bring my bill separately." I repeated, my tone firm but polite. I'll pay for what I ordered. The rest. I gestured toward the table. Is theirs. The room went still. Dad sputtered. Rachel, don't be ridiculous. You made the reservation. You can't. Yes, I can. I cut in, my voice steady. And I just did. The server nodded uncertainly, retreating with the kind of cautious speed reserved for handling live explosives. Thomas finally found his voice, his cheeks flushed. Rachel, come on. This is Dad's night. Don't do this here. Funny, I said, turning to him. That's exactly what I thought when he told me I wasn't family. Maybe he should have saved that for another night, Caleb muttered under his breath. You didn't have to go nuclear. I turned to him, my eyes sharp. Nuclear. You've been living off me like a parasite, Caleb. I kept you from being homeless more times than I can count. You think I don't notice when you forget to pay me back? Consider tonight your wake-up call. His jaw dropped and he sank back in his chair silent. The server returned minutes later, placing one check neatly by my plate and laying the thick leather folder in the middle of the table for the rest. I slid my credit card inside mine without hesitation. The sound of the folder snapping shut seemed to echo. Dad reached for the other check, fumbling. His voice cracked with anger and embarrassment. You've made your point, Rachel. Enough. But I wasn't done. I pushed back my chair slightly, my gaze sweeping the table. You all love to remind me I'm alone. No husband, no kids. But do you know why? My voice rose raw and steady. Because every ounce of energy I had went into this family, into saving you over and over while you mocked me behind my back. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of Silent Night drifting from the main dining hall. I leaned back, collected my card already being processed. Well, I said softly, you don't have to worry about me anymore. From tonight forward, you're on your own. The words hung there heavy and final as the server slipped away to run my card. The garland lights flickered. The children stared wide-eyed. And my family, my so-called family, sat frozen in their own disbelief. The night air bit into my cheeks as I pushed through the doors of Oakwood Prime. Snow crunched beneath my boots, the city glowing with Christmas lights strung across Michigan Avenue, but none of it reached me. My chest felt hollow, my body trembling not from cold but from the words still ringing in my ears. You're not part of this family. The phrase replayed with every step I took, slicing deeper, even as something inside me felt strangely lighter. I wrapped my coat tighter and walked toward the train, the weight of the evening pressing down. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating how much overtime I needed to cover the next bill, or wondering how to keep everyone afloat. I had drawn a line, and yet the relief came tangled with a grief I couldn't untangle. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was buzzing non-stop. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my boots, and saw the screen lit with missed calls. Mom, Thomas. Caleb, even Dad. The voicemail icon blinked like a siren. I set the phone on the counter, poured a glass of water, and tried to breathe, but the buzzing started again. Thomas's name flashed. Against my better judgment, I answered. Rachel, you can't just walk out like that. His voice rushed frantic. They're talking about repossessing my car. I thought... He broke off, lowering his tone. Look, I was counting on you. Don't leave me hanging. I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest growing heavier. Thomas, I told you tonight. I'm done. Come on, Rach, he pleaded. You know I can't keep up with everything. The kids need... I hung up before he could finish, my hand shaking as I placed the phone face down. The silence lasted only seconds before it rang again. This time, Caleb... I didn't answer, but his voicemail came through seconds later, his voice dripping with desperation. Sis, I just got kicked out of my place. My roommate changed the locks. I don't have anywhere to go. Please, just until I get back on my feet. You can't let me freeze out here. I deleted it without listening to the end. Another call. Mom. I answered, my voice flat. What do you want, Mom? Her voice cracked a mixture of command and desperation. "Rachel, don't abandon us. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. He's humiliated. You embarrassed him tonight. Do you want that on your conscience?" Tears stung my eyes, but I kept my tone sharp. "I didn't humiliate him. He did that himself." "You're being dramatic," she snapped, though her voice shook. Then softer, pleading. "Please, honey, don't turn your back on your family. We need you." I hung up again. My chest ached, but underneath the ache was steel. Then came Dad's voicemail. I sat on the couch listening in the dim glow of the streetlight through the blinds. His voice was lower than I expected, forced calm, masking the tremor beneath. "Rachel, what you did tonight. That wasn't right. But He hesitated, exhaled sharply. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I'm still your father. You owe me respect. Call me back." I dropped the phone onto the cushion beside me. Respect. The word tasted bitter. I wanted to sleep to shut it all out, but my mind wouldn't quiet. I pulled my laptop from the coffee table and opened my email, desperate for distraction. That's when I saw it. An alert from my bank. Subject line, "New credit account activity." My pulse quickened. I clicked. The details glared at me. A personal loan, $15,000 opened 3 months ago. My name attached. My social security number. Payments already overdue. My hands went cold. I scrolled further, my eyes catching on the memory. Mom sliding papers across the table one afternoon. "Just routine refinance," she had said. "We need a co-signer." "It's nothing." I'd been late for work, pen scratching the lines without question. Now here it was. $15,000 chained to me without my consent. The weight of betrayal was crushing. It wasn't enough that they drained my bank accounts, that every raise and bonus evaporated into their crises. They had stolen my name, my credit, my future. I stood in the middle of my apartment, my body trembling a sound, between a sob and a laugh breaking from my throat. For years I had believed if I gave enough, they'd finally love me, accept me. Instead, they had reduced me to a signature, a lifeline to exploit, until there was nothing left. The glass of water still sat on the table, condensation dripping down its side. I picked it up, drank deeply, and set it down with finality. The grief in my chest hardened into something else, something sharper. This wasn't just pain anymore. It was resolve. I reached for my phone, not to call them back, but to open a new tab. I typed in the name of a law firm I'd seen advertised on the train. Tomorrow I would make an appointment. Tomorrow I would begin the process of taking my life back. For now, I stood at the window watching snow swirl under the streetlight. The phone buzzed again and again on the couch behind me, unanswered. I didn't turn around. I stayed there staring into the storm, the decision already made. The first notices came in January. A past due letter from the mortgage company, another from the utility provider. Mom left a frantic voicemail about the bank threatening foreclosure, her voice high and ragged. A week later, Thomas called furious. They towed my car. "Rachel, you know what that means? I can't even get to work." What am I supposed to do? Caleb's messages were more pathetic than angry. "I'm crashing on Chris's couch. He says I can stay 2 weeks max. Please, Rach. I don't have anyone else." I listened to them all with the same hollow calm. The panic that used to grip me, the guilt that sent me scrambling to fix everything was gone. I hit delete, one by one, the weight sliding from my shoulders. Instead, I sat in the office of Amanda Brooks, a civil attorney downtown with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority. Her office smelled faintly of leather and coffee shelves lined with thick law books. I slid the loan paperwork across her desk, my signature glaring up at me like a scar. She flipped through the pages, frowning. "They used your information without full disclosure. This isn't valid consent, Rachel." She tapped the signature line. "We can dispute this. You're not liable for that debt." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "So I'm not stuck with $15,000? "No," she said firmly. It may take time, but legally you can fight this. And you should. For the first time in years, I felt a crack of light inside me. Relief, yes, but also something fiercer. Vindication. A month later, while my family scrambled to pay bills, I booked a trip I'd been dreaming about since college. Hawaii. No last-minute transfers, no checking my balance to make sure I could cover someone else's crisis. Just me. I landed in Honolulu in early March, warm air kissing my skin the second I stepped off the plane. The ocean, stretched impossibly blue palm trees swayed, and I almost didn't recognize the woman in the reflection of my hotel window. Tan skin hair loose, a smile breaking across my face without effort. Days passed in a rhythm I'd never known. I lay on the sand, the surf rolling against my feet, a paperback in my hands. I walked to the spa each morning, letting strangers knead years of tension from my body. At night, I dined on fresh fish, sipping cocktails with tiny umbrellas, watching the sun melt into the horizon. It was there in the hotel lounge that I met David Carter. He was 34 in marketing in town for a conference. We struck up a conversation over coffee, casual at first, but something about him disarmed me. He didn't ask what I did for my family. He didn't joke about me being single or imply my worth was measured in children. He listened. He laughed at my sarcasm. He told me about his work, his travels, and asked about my dreams, not my obligations. Over the next few days, we walked the beach at dusk, talking until the waves blurred into night. With him, I felt something I hadn't in years seen. When I flew back to Chicago, my phone was flooded again. Voicemails, texts, emails, bills overdue, cars gone, threats of foreclosure. But I felt different, the ocean still in my bones. Amanda called me into her office in April. "It's official," she said, sliding papers across her desk. "The debt is cleared. Your name is clean." I stared at the document, tears pricking my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice shaking. She smiled, leaning back. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You finally stood up." But the glow of victory dimmed a week later when another call came. Not from Mom, not from Thomas or Caleb. From the hospital. "Your father was admitted this morning," the nurse explained. "Chest pains. It's serious." I drove through the city in a daze, lights blurring past the sound of the tires on wet asphalt pounding in time with my heartbeat. At the hospital, the sterile smell hit me like a wall. I found the cardiology wing, my palms sweating as I pressed the elevator buttons. Through the glass window of his room, I saw him. My father, Edward, looked smaller. Paler wires running from his chest to a machine that beeped steadily beside him. His eyes were closed, his face slack with exhaustion. I stood frozen in the hallway, torn clean down the middle. One part of me burned with years of anger, betrayal, the sound of his voice declaring I wasn't family. The other part ached with something older, deeper. The daughter who used to hope one day he'd look at her with pride. My hand hovered near the door handle, shaking. I couldn't bring myself to go in. Not yet. I stayed there in the corridor, the beeping of the monitor faint through the glass, my breath fogging against the window as I watched him sleep. And I felt the war inside me rage louder than ever between the love I couldn't kill and the wounds that refused to heal. The nurse came out and told me he was awake. My legs felt heavy as I stepped inside. The room was dim, the hum of machines filling the silence. My father lay propped up against thin white pillows, his skin pale, his hands trembling against the blanket. When his eyes met mine, there was no bluster, no sharpness, just exhaustion. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I didn't think you'd come." I stood at the foot of the bed, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. For a moment, I couldn't find words. Then I pulled the chair closer, lowering myself into it slowly. He swallowed, eyes drifting toward the watch on the nightstand, the one I had given him. His voice broke as he spoke. I was wrong. All those years, the things I said at dinner, I thought admitting I needed you made me weak. I couldn't stand that my daughter was the one keeping us afloat. It made me feel small. I looked at him, the man who had raised me, the man who had cut me down with words sharper than any blade. So instead of thanking me, you told me I wasn't part of the family. Tears filled his eyes. I was jealous of you, Rachel. Jealous of your strength. I knew deep down I'd never match it. So I tried to break you before you broke me. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My throat tightened. I wanted to unleash every ounce of anger, every sleepless night, every moment I had sacrificed only to be dismissed. But all I managed was a quiet, steady voice. I'm not ready to forgive you. Not yet. But if you're serious about changing, if you really mean what you're saying, I'll give you a chance to prove it. He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. That's all I can ask. In the weeks that followed, things shifted in ways I never thought possible. Thomas finally sat down with Stephanie and admitted their finances were a mess. Together they cut expenses and started paying their share toward Mom and Dad's house. Caleb, with nowhere else to run, took a full-time job at a warehouse. He hated the hours, but he showed up every day because he had no other choice. Mom began tracking every dollar, learning how to cook at home instead of swiping credit cards at restaurants. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't their safety net. Months passed. Spring melted into summer into fall. I focused on my work on therapy, on quiet weekends with David. I felt lighter, freer, as though the years of being weighed down by everyone else's burdens had finally lifted. Then came December again. Mom called me, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. We're planning a small Christmas dinner this year, she said. Everyone is pitching in. No big restaurants, just family. We'd love for you to come. I hesitated, the memories of Oakwood Prime still raw. But something in her tone, earnest, hopeful, made me say yes. That Christmas, I walked into their modest dining room in Evanston. The table was set with mismatched plates, a roast chicken in the center, green beans steaming in a chipped casserole dish. Thomas and Stephanie had brought dessert, Caleb had bought the wine, and Mom had baked bread herself. For once, I wasn't carrying the weight of the evening on my shoulders. I slid into my seat, looking around at the faces of my family. The kids were laughing, crumbs on their lips, their innocence still intact. Mom passed me a roll, her eyes warm. Caleb poured my glass without being asked. Dad, thinner now, but steadier, lifted his cup. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. To family, he said, his eyes lingering on me. This time the words weren't sharp or performative. They were real. We raised our glasses together. My chest swelled, not with the ache of old wounds, but with something gentler. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Later that night, as I walked out into the crisp December air, snow falling soft around me, I realized I had finally stopped trying to buy my place at the table. I belonged because I had chosen to, not because I had paid for it, and that was enough. If you've ever had to set boundaries with the people you love, you know how hard it is. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is demand respect, even if it means walking away first. I'd love to hear if you've ever faced something similar. Share your thoughts, your stories in the comments. And if this journey spoke to you, don't forget to stay connected. There are more stories like mine waiting for you here.